Vanakkam. Hello friends. As we continue exploring the line of the early Cholas, in the previous episode, we saw about Perunar Killi, the great good Killi, who came in the 9th generation and ruled between 150 and 175 Common Era, with the epithet Rajasuyam Veta indicating that this king performed the great royal sacrifice. We also saw how this epithet itself should have been added to the king's name by the redactors who compiled the poems at a much later date. In the next generation comes the Chola king KOCHENGANAAN, literally meaning the red-eyed one, who ruled between 175 and 200 Common Era according to the genealogy table given by K.N. Sivarajapillai in his The Chronology of the Early Tamils. He is shown as the last ruler of this early Chola lineage, and KNS in passing reference quotes the Kalingathuparani, a 12th century work of Jayangondar, in praise of Klothunga Cholan, a medieval king, wherein the author traces the lineage of the early Cholas and ends it with this king KOCHENGANAAN. Like the great Karihala Solan, this king gets a haze of legend woven around his name over a period of time, and Nilakanta Sastri in his book The Cholas points out the need to exercise caution in separating contemporary sources from later day legends. KOCHENGANAAN is shown as defeating the Chera king Kanaikal Irumporai in a murderous battle in a Puram poem 74 sung by Irumporai himself. The setting of the battle is given as Por or Tirupor in the early commentaries on this poem, but later the battlefield gets shifted to Karumalam. Today we associate Karumalam with modern day Sirhari, but Nilakanta Sastri places this Karumalam near Karuvur in Tondai Mandalam. Irumporai gets defeated in this battle and is imprisoned at a place called Kudavayil Kotam. In the heart-wrenching Purananuru poem that he renders, he talks of how, dying of thirst, he requests the prison guards for water, but once the water was brought, so ashamed was he at his state that he chooses to die in captivity rather than face the misery and humiliation of an imprisoned life. So while the early commentaries to this Puram poem give this version of Irumporai's end, therein comes another Sangam poet, Poihayar, who comes across as an important lineal link poet, having sung the Chera king of the previous generation, Kokode Marban. Now he has rendered a poem in praise of Irumporai as well in Nattinai. Legend says that Poihayar was a friend of Irumporai, and Poihayar has sung 40 stanzas known as the Kalavali Narpadu that describe in gruesome terms this war that happened between Irumporai and KOCHENGANAAN. This work has been included as one of the 18 didactic works known as the Padinankil Kanakku Noolgal, which come immediately after the period of Sangam literature. While all the other works in this collection, such as the Tirukkural and Naladiyar, deal with matters internal, matters of morality and ethics for the mind to contemplate on, Kalavali Narpadu is the only work that deals with matters external, that is Purathinai, namely war. Yeror Kalavali Andri, Kalavali Teror Totriya Vendrium goes a Nurpa in Tolgapiyam. Shown as a subdivision of Vahaithinai that denotes war, this is marked as a genre of poems sung on a kalam, a field, which could either have been an yerkalam, meaning an agricultural field, or a porkalam, that is a battlefield. Every stanza in the Kalavali Narpadu ends with the term Kalathu and ironically sings the praise of the Chola king KOCHENGANAAN. Full of horrific descriptions of war, if we were to see but one example, அஞ்சனக் குன்றைக்கும் யானை அமருழக்கி இங்குலிகக் குன்றே போல் தோன்றுமே செங்கன் வரிவரால் மீன் புரளுங் காவிரி நாடன் பொருநரை அட்டகளத்து goes stanza 7. He is Kaviri Nadan, king of the fertile lands watered by the river Kaveri that is abundant with the red-eyed carpfish. In the battlefield where he slaughtered his enemies, his elephants that resembled dark-hued hillocks before the beginning of the war now look like hillocks made of red wax, meaning that the elephants were doused in blood. A narrative evolved later that Poiheyar sang the Kalavali in praise of Cholan KOCHENGANAAN as an appeal to free Irumborai from prison. Upon presenting the Kalavali, the bard petitioned the Chola king to release Irumborai from prison, and it is claimed that KOCHENGANAAN obliged and released the Chera king. So where does this narrative get mentioned? In 3 literary works that come during the rule of the medieval Cholas, quite a time period later, namely the Tamil Viduthudu, the Moovarula and Kalingathu Parani. The Moovarula, sung by Vottakuthar, the famed author who has sung on 3 successive Chola rulers, namely Vikrama Cholan, who ruled between 1118 and 1136 Common Era, Klothunga Cholan II, who ruled between 1133 and 1150 Common Era, and Rajarajan II, who ruled between 1146 and 1163 Common Era. And the verse goes, Nallavan poihei kalavali நாற்பதுக்கு வில்லவன் கால் தலையை விட்ட கோன். Here Villavan referring to the king whose insignia was the bow and arrow, the Chera king Irumporai. In Kalingathu Parani the verses go, களவழி கவிதை பொய்கை உரை செய்ய உதியன் கால்வழி தலையை வெட்டி அரசு இட்ட அவனும், where Udiyan refers to the Chera king. Was this twist in the tale made to project Cholan Senganan in a benevolent light? We can only guess. But more interesting is the religious persona that was built around this king during the medieval times. In a legendary story, in the manner of the Buddhist Jataka tales, points out Nilaganda Sastri, the king is made to be a spider in his previous birth, and the story is first picked up by the Saivite saint Thirunavukarasar alias Appar, and then gets reinforced in the Thiruvalangadu plates issued by Rajendra Chola. In the Kurukkai Veeratta Padiham that sings the praise of Lord Shiva at Kurukkai Veerattam, Appar sings, Silandiyim Aanaikkavil Thirunilal Pandar செய்து உலந்து அவன் இறந்த போதே கோச்செங்கனானுமாக கலந்த நீர் காவிரி சூழ் சோநாட்டுச் சோழர்தங்கள் குலம் தனல் பிறப்பித்திட்டார் குறுக்கை வீரட்டானரே. The story goes that the spider regularly worshipped the linga under a tree on the banks of the river Kaveri at Thiruvanikkaval. And seeing the leaves falling on the linga sullying its cleanliness, the spider wove a web above it to prevent the same. In due course of time, the spider dies, and Lord Shiva, happy with the way it was sincere in its devotion, grants that it be born as the royal scion of the Chola line. Thus, a mythical legend gets woven around a real historic personage. The fact that Appar, who came in the 7th century, nearly 500 years after the rule of Kochenganan ended, shows that the king had indeed become a legend by then. But how did the story evolve? We can only guess. In fact, in this hymn, Appar narrates several anecdotes involving Saivite followers, and these seem to have formed the basis of the later work Periya Puranam and other such Puranic works, while Appar himself repeats the anecdote in another poem that he sings on the Lord at Nanipalli. The story is picked up and retold by several Saivite and Vaishnavite hymnists of the medieval period in the Tevaram and the Divya Prabandham in the 7th and 8th centuries. Sundarar, while singing the praise of the Lord at Thiruvavadurai, sings, தெருண்ட வாயிடை நூல் கொண்டு சிலந்தி சித்திர பந்தல் சிக்கென இயற்ற சுருண்ட செஞ்சடையாய் அது தன்னைச் சோழனாக்கிய தொடர்ச்சி கண்டு அடியேன் புரண்டு வீழ்ந்து பொன்மலர் பாதம் போற்றி போற்றி என்று அன்போடு புலம்பி அரண்டு என் மேல் வினைக்கு அஞ்சி வந்தடைந்தேன் ஆவடுதுறை ஆதி எம்மானே. Here, Sundarar, while praising the Lord at Tiruvavadurai, narrates the spider incident and praises the Lord for the grace bestowed upon the creature, and then says, this makes him take heed of all his acts in the previous births and makes him seek refuge at the golden feet of the Lord, so that he too may be bestowed with such grace in the future. While the Saivite saint ஞான சம்பந்தர் and Sundarar credit the Shiva temples at Ambar, Vaihal and Nannilam to Kochenganaan, Thirumangai Alvar, who has sung in the Divya Prabandham about the grace of Lord Vishnu, claims that Kochenganaan's sway extended much beyond Chola territory and even records a few of his battle victories, like how he defeated the chieftain Vilandai Vel at Alundur. But it is in the 12th century hagiography Periyapuranam that the author, Saint Sekilar, reinvents the story of Kochenganaan, and he is shown as being born to one Subhadevan and Kamalavati, and goes forth to narrate an absurd tale of the queen delaying the birth of her son in order to make it happen during an auspicious time by having her ministers hang her upside down. And she dies at the time of the birth, but not before glancing at her beloved son, whose eyes were red due to the blood going to its head while she hung upside down, and calls out to him, Kochenganaan, the red-eyed one. Thus the last of the great early Cholas, Kochenganaan, gets a legend woven around his name a good 1,000 years later, and the spider story is retold with a new antagonist, an elephant, entering the scene. And here he is even made out to be the builder of the temple at Thiruvannaikkaval, which we now know as Jambukeshwarar Koil. It is also claimed that Kochenganaan built 70 temples for Shiva all over the country. It is interesting how the stories around this king developed over a period of time, and we saw in the previous episode of how the Chola copper plates too gave different genealogies to these kings with scant respect for chronology. Thus, Kochenganaan gets placed in different time periods in these copper plates, and the unbuilt plates of Sundara Cholan claim how this king built temples for Gaurisha, that is Lord Shiva, all over Chola territory. It even claims that he had a son named Nalladikon, for which of course there is no historical proof. What was the fascination that this early Chola king held for such religious legends to be raised around him? There is no clue in the Sangam literary works. In fact, in his history of the Tamils from the earliest times to 600 AD, P.D. Srinivasa Iyengar coolly places Kochenganaan in the 6th century Common Era, and in his footnotes on this king in his book The Cholas, Nilakanta Sastri points out how arguments were put forth by contemporary historians such as E.V. Anandarama Iyer that there must have been two Kochenganaans and there should have been a Kochenganaan II who was the ruler who came later and built the Saivite temples. Well, we will not go into this here. For our purpose, there was a Sangam king by name Kochenganaan who ironically had no Sangam poems dedicated to him, but nevertheless finds firmly placed in that generation by the strength of the Puram poem rendered by Kanaikal Irumborai, about which we will see in detail when we look at the history of this Chera king. That said, another very popular Chola king of the Sangam times, who ironically does not find a place in the genealogy tables of KNS, is the Chola king Kopperancholan. Popular not only because of the number of Sangam poems sung on him and by him that narrate a veritable piece of history, but more so because the poems establish that this king ruled from Urayur, the early Chola capital, at one point of time, and Nilakanta Sastri mentions him as a king proper in his work. So, we will explore the history of Cholan in the next episode. Vanakkam.